Hey guys, and welcome back to Fuddbusters, where we work to correct myths and misinformation in the two-way world. I'm your host, Matt LaRosiere. I'm a gun rights lawyer and an auto mechanic, and my very first video was about pistol braces. I knew I'd have to revisit this topic sooner or later, but I didn't expect it to be in my very fourth video. Alas, here we are. Now, I've been in possession of the very same document everyone else is bragging about. It's really not that impressive. It got leaked quite liberally, and anyone who's ever had anything to do with the 2A community has it. It's a draft of a proposed rulemaking regarding pistol braces from the ATF. Again, I'm feeling deja vu, because you've probably heard some big rumblings from all the Top Gun celebrities about how ATF has declared braces stocks or banned pistol braces. Well, I'm not here to tell you you've got nothing to worry about. I'm here to tell you the truth, and the truth right now seems to me a little better than some are leading you to believe.
Okay, prepare your ear holes for this disclaimer. You ready? While the host of Fuddbusters is a lawyer, he is not your lawyer. If you pay him, maybe, either way you slice it, the video that you are about to watch is not to be construed as legal advice.
So now, this is the second time I've been forced to explain that something the ATF is doing might not be as bad as it seems at first blush. I need to make it very clear that for the entirety of my legal career, I've been fighting that agency. I've devoted a large part of my life to fighting for our rights, and it has been, and will continue to be, a long and contested battle. When you're in a fight, as I have been, as we are, it's important to know exactly what moves your opponent is making and what moves he isn't. He may telegraph, he may fake you out, he may juke, but there's a truth out there somewhere, one we likely won't know until the fight is over. The best we can do while we're fighting is analyze the information we have and hopefully base our strategy on something as close to the truth as we can get. So let's start with the basics. The ATF has the authority to regulate firearms that fall within the National Firearms Act and the Gun Control Act. It does not have authority to regulate mere accessories. Now you might be saying, but bump stocks, and I agree. However, this question is very different. There was a hole for ATF to ram the semi-truck of the bump stock ban through. That ban was totally in excess for sure. However, in this instance, it appears not even the ATF thinks they have the authority to regulate or opine on pistol braces themselves. After all, unlike in the NFA, which regulates specific combinations of parts as machine guns or conversion kits, no such thing exists for a stock. Repeatedly in this draft rulemaking, the ATF acknowledges this. Here's a few examples. On page 5 of the unofficial draft, ATF recognizes that the GCA and NFA, which it is tasked with enforcing, regulate firearms and not individual components. As such, ATF does not classify unregulated components or accessories alone. In the remainder of this paragraph, ATF explains that certain components may be relevant in assessing the maker's intent with respect to the design of a particular firearm as a whole, which may then result in it falling within a particular definition. Further, on page 13, it states that the document is not a determination that any particular weapon equipped with a stabilizing brace is an NFA firearm. It does, however, state that should any such determination be issued, the director plans to retroactively exempt such firearms from the collection of NFA taxes. And just to put a pin on the point, the agency again states that the contents of the document do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. So we've talked about what it doesn't do. Let's talk about what it does do. We understand, and the law reflects, that ATF does not have jurisdiction over unregulated firearm accessories. So when the ATF is looking at a completed weapon, something it does have jurisdiction over, how does it determine whether something is a big pistol or a short rifle? Well, we talked about this in our very first video, and I'd encourage you to take a peep at it. We also discussed how irrational and insane restricting SBRs is in the first place. But that aside, the law hinges on whether the firearm was designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder. For pistols, the law focuses on whether it is designed to be operable in one hand. Now, I know that's kind of stupid to use pistols single-handedly if it can be avoided, but I never said any acts of Congress were particularly bright. So that means ATF looks at a particular gun in a particular configuration and makes its determination based on that. This is what they've been doing for ages with braced firearms and any other firearm. We haven't known exactly what their MO or criteria were. We'd just feed them a gun and they'd either feed back an okay or some unconstitutional garbage. What this document looks like to me, rather than a ban or a crackdown on braces, is actually them being forthcoming with how they may have been determining which guns are handguns at all. Now, the government loves to use the totality of the circumstances approach, not because it's consistent or predictable, but because it leaves lots of wiggle room for them to roll over our rights. That said, this is how ATF has been doing it for ages. Now, though, we can see their factor list. Some of them are rational and some are downright infuriating. With all that out of the way, let's look at the factors ATF put forth in this draft rulemaking. First up, type and caliber. This basically stands for the proposition that if the particular firearm is in a caliber that's impractical to fire one-handed, even with the brace, because of recoil, it may evidence that the firearm isn't intended to be used as a pistol. This is one that kind of sounds rational at first, but isn't consistent with reality. Some people are complaining that ATF didn't indicate what caliber is too much. Well, that's not how this works. There are plenty of mega big bore handgats out there. Ever fire an M500 Smith & Wesson? You gotta remember, it's just one factor. Next up, weight and length. Pretty straightforward. If it's too heavy or long to aim one-handed, even with the brace, ATF is more likely to call it a rifle or shotgun. Of course, the one-hand talk is stupid and inconsistent, seeing as there are loads of long-accepted handguns that are really miserable to fire from one hand. Still, it's another factor. Length of pull. This is one that really triggered me when people were talking about this when it comes to braces. You see, length of pull is a stock-specific measurement. It's the distance between the trigger and the back of the stock. A good rule of thumb is holding the gun in your elbow and seeing the relationship. Common length of pull, that puts it right here, is about 14 inches, unless you're a tiny person or a Neanderthal like me. ATF kind of seems to be wise on this one. What they're saying is that if it's not a stock and only intended to be used as a forearm brace, why should it extend beyond your forearm? So the idea is, if the back of the brace is a length more appropriate of a buttstock, it isn't likely to be usable as a brace. But if it's up here in your forearm area, that probably tends it to be, more brace category. Next up, attachment method. Basically here, they're talking about the way the brace is fixed to the firearm. It ties in with the length of pull discussion we just have. Does it add unnecessary length to the firearm, which makes it more useful as a stock, without increasing its utility as a brace? Next up, the design of the brace itself. This is the most convoluted part of the agency's analysis. Some of it is pretty rational, like whether the brace functions better as a stock than a brace, but who cares whether it's similar to a known shoulder stock? I mean, that's kind of BS if you ask me. Remember, the only question ATF is allowed to answer here is whether the firearm is designed to be fired from the shoulder or not. I don't see how it matters whether it has parts interchangeability with a known stock. Seems just stupid. It also covers other parts of the design, like how much of the brace would touch the shoulder compared to how much is needed, to brace your forearm. Its materials and any other features that make it more useful as a stock without a countervailing, benefit as a brace. Aimpoint. This asks whether, when the gun is braced up against your forearm, you can actually look down the sights effectively. They seem to think that a gun that points when braced in such a way that one could not accurately hit a target is likely not intended to be used as a brace. Secondary grip, or pistol grips, whatever. This is more obsession with the outdated one-hand language in the law. The idea is that a foregrip tends to show that it is not designed to be held and fired in one hand. Sights and scopes. This asks whether the firearm has a sight with eye relief that would be unusable when fired from the brace. So probably best to keep your LPVOs and variable zoom scopes off of these unless you've got a scout scope sitting around somewhere. If you're unsure what that means, take a magnified scope designed for a rifle and put it out at arm's length. It don't work so good. Peripheral accessories. This seems to be a catch-all for whether the firearm has like stuff hanging off of it that is not pistol-y, like a bipod or a huge magazine that would make it impractical to fire as a pistol. That said, I mean, there's been plenty of pistols that have both of those. But yeah, those were the listed criteria which ATF says is non-exclusive, and also that no particular combination of factors necessarily makes a firearm an illegal shortboy. It then goes on to describe some of the other things the agency may look to. These are pretty problematic as they cover subjective things like use by members of the firearms industry to get a conception of intent. Intent, remember, is very important here, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So now we know, at least kind of, what's going through their heads when they look at a firearm with a brace to determine what it is. Remember, they've been doing this for years now, just without ever explaining the factors. What will happen going forward, at least from what I can see right now, is the same thing that happened before. ATF will get guns submitted them, or find them in connection with a crime or something, and they'll go through this whole list, compare all the factors, and spit out either an okay or some unconstitutional garbage. Some of you might be mad at me for the somewhat neutral tone I've taken with respect to these factors. I mean, I wouldn't really call it neutral, but for me it's pretty neutral. Make no mistake, I hate this crap, like a lot. But this ties back to my fighting analogy from the beginning of the video. Not only do we need to know what the opponent is doing, we need to know what our objective is in this fight. I know what mine is, but what's yours? Are you of the opinion that these are properly understood as pistols and that the NFA is not a problem as it's written? Or are you of the position that it's your right to have a rifle or pistol with any barrel length or accessory you choose? Remember, as ATF acknowledges, that the NFA originally sought to ban all handguns as firearms most likely to be used in crime. To prevent people from getting around that handgun regulation, they gave the same treatment to short rifles and shotguns so as to prevent people from evading the handgun regs by cutting down a long gun. Now, though, the Supreme Court has recognized it's at the core of our Second Amendment right to have the most concealable firearms of all, handguns. So why is it not our right to have slightly larger firearms? The NFA is a leprotic mark on American history. It's an act I hope posterity will one day forget. But you've got to decide what it is you're telling your representatives. If you're telling them, no, they're handguns, it's okay to restrict SBRs, well, you have to expect the government to do some checks to see if they're handgunny. If you're telling your reps, on the other hand, this is insane, how is it I can have as many handguns I want, but something slightly less concealable lands me in jail without a permission slip? Then all this discussion is what it should be, underlining how insane the NFA is as a law and a policy. Now, I want to talk about intent. I've talked about this too. Our system of law requires, generally, that criminal statutes have a scienter requirement. That means in order to violate the law and get criminal penalties, you have to knowingly or intentionally violate it. Here, though, ATF acknowledged that most people with braced firearms did so with a good faith belief that they are not NFA firearms. If you ask me, that makes random, widespread prosecution of brace owners pretty difficult. Could it be that this is a friendly ATF, if such a thing could ever exist, jumping in front of the brace issue in a more rational way to prevent a more aggressive cabinet from taking a wilder approach? It's possible. Like I said, too soon to know for sure. But it definitely makes it a bit harder for a new administration to step in and change course drastically. There's also a legal issue that we only get 14 days for comment. That's in defiance of the GCA, which requires a 90-day period. This might be fixed in the final, but again, who knows? All that stuff said, guys, remember what I keep saying. We have to separate what is actual law from what is fear, threat, and FUD lore. The ATF does not have the statutory or constitutional authority to ban braces or decree them to be stocks. The question was, and still is, was the particular firearm designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder primarily? And remember, ATF said, even here, that there are certainly legitimate uses for these braces. Then again, this could be, on the other hand, scare tactics designed to disappear braced pistols from the market. ATF does this all the time in the gun industry, as we are a particularly excitable bunch. People for decades have believed loads of stuff to be banned by ATF with no evidence aside from some scare letters. Short version, no. Your brace still isn't banned, at least not yet. As always, guys, remember to keep abreast of what's going on and verify these things for yourself. If you're really concerned, consult your friendly neighborhood gun lawyer. Spreading misinformation about what is and is not legal is how we wind up following laws that don't actually exist. I'd just also like to take a moment to thank all of you who've been watching and sharing my videos. See, I'm a newcomer to the YouTube scene, so your support means the world to me. I'd love to devote more time to fighting misinformation, and if you like, subscribe, share, and ring the bell or whatever, not only will it cause my brain to release the good chemicals, it's going to help me grow the channels. But anyway, I'll see you guys next time, and remember, anything more than minimum compliance is self-regulation. Take care, and keep cool.